the first in this egg freezing series is going to touch on why I decided to freeze my eggs. Now, whilst I love sharing my experiences and I love discussing things that I'm really passionate about on social media, such as fashion, sustainability, my journey to becoming vegan, and just generally spirituality, because that's just who I am to a core, I have kept my personal life quite private, and it's something I perhaps will always do. And I also rarely show insights into family life and even friends. But that's a conscious choice that I've made, and it serves me well to do that because I don't like to blur boundaries. What I do feel comfortable sharing at this point is that I have been single for many years, and I have thoroughly invested in myself and my career, and there's never been any regrets in that sense. I think if I had met the right person, maybe my life could have looked different, but I am a very ambitious person and I don't believe that will ever change despite what may happen personally. But in terms of on a relationship level, I don't believe I have missed out on anything. There's no regrets at all. And I very much live my life in alignment. And if there's a deep desire for me to do something, I do it. And I believe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. So, from an egg freezing perspective, it all aligns with where I am. And this is not a decision that it's because it's become an urgency or a medical need. It's purely just aligned with where I am in life. And I feel so at peace and so calm with this decision. But essentially, I embarked on a self-love journey. I shouldn't use the air quotes, but a very powerful journey about 6 years ago. And as part of that, I also became vegan. But that's a different conversation for another day. Today, we are talking about why I decided to freeze my eggs. So essentially, single, content, exactly where I feel like I'm supposed to be in my life. So that's just some background. And in terms of freezing my eggs, about 3 years ago, I decided to carry out a fertility test, which is actually on my TikTok. At that point, I did share the fact that I was going through fertility testing. So around 3 years ago, I booked. Actually, that was a part of my medical insurance at the time, so I was very grateful that that was included in my work contract at the time. Otherwise, I think those tests usually cost around, and you don't quote me because things change, of course, and it depends on what clinic you go to. But I went to a private clinic close to where I was living at the time. I would say that those kind of tests can cost between maybe a couple of £100 to £1,000, depending on what profile you do. But essentially, I went ahead with an AMH blood test, which tells you, and again, I'm not a medical professional and I'm recalling from history, but essentially, you do an AMH blood test, which kind of gives you your count for an AMH hormone, anti-Mullerian hormone, I want to say, and then also an AFC scan, which counts your follicles. And at that point, the nurse, and again, I'm happy to talk about that in a separate video because, again, that I think there's a whole process involved in that. So, again, I went through that process, and at that time, the nurse said to me, levels are all good, average for your age, there wasn't any concerns. I have regular periods. I've never been on long term birth control, so I was very conscious about being on medication of any kind, any hormonal medication. So she suggested to me at that point, I was single, not married, not in a long term relationship. But she said it's better to freeze your eggs sooner rather than later because once they're frozen at that specific age that you've decided to go ahead with freezing. So if I had frozen them back then, they would have been 3 years younger. And she also suggested to me at that time that um, depending on how many pregnancies you would expect from freezing your eggs, you may need to do multiple rounds, but of course, there's a cost associated with that. Um, I will go into the cost and processes in a future video, but for now, we're just focusing on why I decided to do it. So, at that moment in time, 3 years ago, I didn't go ahead with freezing my eggs because I'm in my 30s again, for reference. I should have mentioned that. At the time, I felt like I'm very well aware that there's women having children into their mid 40s, and I believe I'm happy and healthy. So at the point, it wasn't really something that I felt like I urgently needed to do, but it was just there, always at the back of my mind, and it was always something I would tell openly to people that, hey, it's something I'm considering. And also, when you're going through such a process, you need to be logistically in the right place, have time, have support. And at that point, I was flying all over the world, and it just wasn't going to be the right time. And I just didn't feel ready for it, to be honest. I was just doing some investigations, and that definitely was a part of my decision to freeze my egg. So, a very important step, just assess your current levels, assess what your fertility levels are like. I think that's really important. And so, even knowing that everything was average and all good for me, I still decided it was something that I wanted to do, because I am someone that I'm a very spiritual person. So, I believe everything is divine. I believe if you are blessed to have children, then you're meant to have those children and you're blessed. Equally, there's other ways to feel to have a very purposeful and content life. And, serving community, doing things that deeply, you are aligned with and passionate about, helping people, loving others. You can have pets, you can have children, you're an aunt, you can be an uncle, and you can adopt children. I'm very aware and very open to those avenues in life. So I'm very at peace if that's where my life takes me. However, most women like myself, especially if you naturally are maternal, and I'm very close to my niece and nephew, and that's a bond I will deeply cherish. And I'm so grateful that I'm an auntie. I'm very close to my niece and nephew, and I feel like watching them grow up, I feel like I've already raised children. And that's probably not a fair statement. I'm not the one that's raised them, but I'm just very, very close to them. And I consider them almost like they're going to be my first babies, and I joke about that. um, However, everybody has this need where they feel like they want to have a child, especially if they meet the right person and they want to build a family unit. I don't think having children is something that I would want to do alone. However, it's an option. As a woman, we have that option, and I think that's a great option. It's a very powerful choice, very empowering choice you can make. So I just wanted to have this insurance policy. Essentially, I wanted to be able to continue my life in the way that I felt like it was very aligned. At the same time, I wanted to make a smart business decision of, if I have the financial means, because it is an expensive process and it's not part of, I don't believe it's part of any insurance policy, and I'm talking about the UK. I know that you can get support fertility under IVF and things like that, but I don't believe you can freeze your eggs under any medical insurance policy. But correct me if I'm wrong. So it was all self funded, not through the NHS, absolutely not. But I do believe that option can exist if you have had complications with conceiving. So again, this is just purely, a medically sound person hasn't had any difficulties deciding to go through a process and self-funding that process. So essentially, I decided, this is where I am in life. I'm single, not in a long-term relationship. I'm still prioritizing my career. There's lots of goals that I want to achieve. And I essentially just wanted to have something that will just relieve my anxiety of that, knowing that, okay, I'm getting older. Okay, I'm getting older. What does this mean? Around the time of the fertility testing that I did, um, I was also surrounded by individuals that were also struggling to conceive. So friends that had got married, family friends that had got married and were struggling to conceive, or sadly going through miscarriages. And I didn't realize how common it was. Maybe women just didn't talk about it as much when I was younger. Um, and everything that I'm saying, there's no medical data behind it. It's just my lived experience. So don't take what I say as for certain. But at the time, there was just a lot of uncertainty around conceiving. And then I started to think, am I being naive, that just because I'm fit and healthy and all my levels are all okay, that when it comes to me wanting to start a family, that I'm not going to come across any issues? And I just wanted to make a really smart, sound decision, a decision that I didn't want to regret down the line, that if I had the financial means to do the egg freezing process and I didn't do it, how would I feel? And how would I feel if I had done it and didn't use them? Although I'm going to go into the process, there's also a lot of I would say that there's not a lot of information or research to support the use of frozen eggs. And that is something my consultant has told me, even now. So I was always aware that it's not a guaranteed process. Just because you've frozen your eggs, there is still no guarantees. And I was aware of that back then. But how I decided that I wanted to proceed was, how would I feel in 5 or 6 years' time when I, you know, at the time, not now. I think my timeline now is probably, how does my life look in the next 5 years? Whereas back then it was more like 10 years. So that's why it wasn't an urgent need. But I wanted to know, how would I feel if I get to that point where I want to start a family, and then I didn't make decisions to preserve my fertility. And it was kind of that trade-off of, do I want the feeling of, oh, I've spent all this money and didn't need to use it because my fertility was fine and I've naturally conceived, versus I had these opportunities and I didn't take them and now I'm struggling. So it was just weighing that up in my mind. And I then moved to Saudi Arabia, an amazing journey, and I loved it. And of course, I talk about that all the time, and it's still a big part of my life now. Um, and I don't know where my life is going to end up. Again, whatever is in alignment, I flow and I surrender, and I believe in God, and I'm a woman of faith. So at the time, although I can have faith that God's going to do the right thing for me, and if it was in my life path and purpose to have children, I know I would be blessed with children. And if I hadn't, I would accept that. And I live by purpose anyway, and I would find purpose and meaning in my life. So either way, I'm very content. I just wanted to do something that is almost just an insurance policy and backup. And that's purely why I decided to go ahead and do with it. Because what I didn't like, and what I started to realize I was doing subconsciously, I would say in the last couple of years, is feeling this pressure that I'd never felt in my life before, where I felt like for the first time I was really starting to feel the timing thing kicking in, and um, just behaving really oddly, because I was conscious of this timeline. And I've never in my life made decisions that haven't been aligned or have been out of fear. Faith over fear is one of my biggest mottos and sayings in life. I started to realize I was making a lot of fear-based decisions, and it was affecting my behavior, affecting, living in that alignment and that surrender state, and that living in faith. And I realized that it was all because I was subconsciously constantly thinking about my fertility and not wanting to lose the chance to be a mother if that's something I decided to do in the future with the right person. Um, and I believed that if I did that, the 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 pressure it would take off me would mean more to me than the cost, the uncertainty, the risks, which again I'll touch on in the next video. So ultimately, it was just me trying to be smart based on where I was in life, single, no long-term partnership, no marriage, knowing that I wanted to be a mother one day if that's what God wills for me. And although I know it might be God's will, I do believe that we have to do everything that's available to us and make a smart choice. Um, so ultimately, it was a way to uh, ease the anxiety I was feeling that I hadn't felt before in my life. Because there was always parts of me that questioned whether motherhood was something that was meant for me. Coming back to the spiritual and faith side, um, sometimes I question if I want to bring children into this world, which again is a topic for another time. But ultimately, the point of this series is decided that I wanted to preserve my chances of becoming a mother, preserving my fertility, deciding that I was behaving in a way because I realized it was starting to cause me anxiety because I couldn't control that timeline, and essentially just doing something about it. And I think once I'd weighed up everything, again, the cost, the fact that I was going to be, going through a medication process for a certain amount of time, the procedure itself, which involves general anesthesia, I just thought, weighing all that up for what I'm going to get at the end of it, I believe it is worth it. So it really is just a case by case thing. And it's not just purely down to, there was no medical need or urgency for me to do this. It's purely to ease my own anxiety, feel like I'm taking control of my own timeline somewhat, because again, there's no guarantees. So yeah, that's why I decided to freeze my eggs.